Have you ever considered a term you likely use every single day? Maybe without giving it a second thought.
Which one are you thinking of?
I'm talking about the Muslim world. You
Yeah.
know, it's a phrase we hear constantly. News headlines, global addresses.
Right. Yeah, it's everywhere.
But have you ever stopped to wonder why it's so, well, universally popular? Or question its actual historical roots?
It's a great question because, we often take these big labels for granted. We assume they've always been there or that their meaning is ancient, fixed.
Exactly. And that assumption, that's precisely what we're challenging today. We're taking a deep dive into the very idea of the Muslim world.
Okay.
Our mission is to unpack its surprising historical development. How did it become such a prevalent notion? I mean, considering the huge diversity of the, 1.5 billion people it supposedly covers?
It is a staggering number of people.
Just about it. Why could leaders like, say, President Barack Obama in his 2009 Cairo address speak to the Muslim world? Or even Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini back in 1988 write a letter to Mikhail Gorbachev on behalf of the Muslim world, this fantastical entity, as our sources call it. It's clearly a powerful concept.
It really is. And what's truly insightful here, and maybe counterintuitive, is that this term Muslim world, it's not actually ancient.
Right. Not ancient at all.
No. And it doesn't even directly come from Ummah, the traditional idea of the Muslim religious community. That's something different.
So if it's not ancient, when did it actually begin to develop? This is where our deep dive gets really interesting, uncovering some surprising origins.
Okay, let's get into it.
Our sources show this idea is actually pretty recent. It only really started taking shape in the 19th century.
1800s, yeah.
And it properly came into its own, reached its full flower, as one source puts it, in the 1870s. And this timing is key. It happened precisely with imperial globalization.
And that whole process of ordering humanity, often, explicitly by race.
Exactly, by race.
And this wasn't just something that happened organically. It was very much a product of political strategy and intellectual labor.
Right.
And crucially, it involved both Muslims and European Christians in its creation. It wasn't just one side.
Okay, so to really understand this, we probably need to step back first.
Mm-hmm.
What was the reality before the 19th century, before this idea took hold?
Good place to start.
Okay, so before the 19th century, when we talk about ummah, that's more of an abstract religious term, right?
Precisely. It's vital to distinguish that from the modern geopolitical idea of a Muslim world. They're not the same thing.
Because historically, Muslims simply weren't united politically. They didn't think of themselves as belonging to one single global political entity.
Not in the way we think of it now, no. We see really compelling examples of this disunity early on. Think about Tipu Sultan of Mysore in India. It's 1798.
Okay.
He desperately sought military aid from the Ottoman Sultan Selim III. Appealing in the name of Muslim solidarity against the British.
Makes sense. Shared enemy, shared faith.
You'd think so. But Selim III, he was all about realpolitik. His strategic alliance was actually with Britain and Russia against Napoleon at that moment.
Whoa, awkward.
Very. So he completely dismissed Tipu's plea, urged peace instead. It just shows political interest trumped religious solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of a global Muslim world wasn't driving statecraft then.
And it gets even messier, doesn't it? Because when war actually did come to Mysore the next year, other Indian Muslim kings actually cooperated with the British. They helped conquer and plunder Tipu Sultan's territory.
Wow. So much for solidarity. That really hammers home the point. Shared religion didn't mean political unity. Not even close.
Another fascinating angle is just how diverse Muslim-ruled lands actually were.
Absolutely. These domains were historically varied, partly because rulers often let conquered peoples keep their own traditions.
Which seems quite pragmatic.
It was. But it wasn't just about the conquered people. Muslims themselves followed, multiple spiritual paths, belonged to various legal schools, spoke countless languages, came from all sorts of backgrounds.
You see this so clearly in the accounts of early travelers, right? Like Ibn Battuta back in the 14th century.
Mm-hmm. Or Evliya Çelebi in the 17th.
Yeah. They noted huge differences between Muslim communities in different places, even though they shared the same basic faith.
Right. And Ibn Battuta, for instance, he never made some simple split between the world of Muslims and the world of non-Muslims. His writings are about specific places, rulers, trade routes. not one big bloc.
And Shalabi, the Ottoman traveler, he actually seemed proud of the diversity within the Ottoman Empire, all these different peoples living peacefully together.
Exactly. For him, the other wasn't some monolithic Christendom or the West. It was specific rival empires, like the Habsburgs.
So an imperial rivalry, not necessarily a religious one.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've established the Ummah wasn't this political unifier, but what about the caliphate? That's a term people often link with a unified Muslim world. Does its history actually back that up?
Well, no, not really. Our sources show that the caliphate, much like the Ummah, it can't really sustain these modern claims of a unified Muslim political past.
How so?
Well, the idea itself got reinvented early on. The Abbasids, for all their prestige, they lost real political power by the 10th century.
Right.
And later on, you had powerful sultans who basically just protected a weak caliph figurehead in Baghdad. They'd trade recognition of the caliph for legitimacy for their own rule.
So it was more symbolic by then.
Increasingly so. And looking wider, you also see this interesting blend of Mongolian and Muslim political traditions.
Okay.
Take Ghazan Khan in the 14th century.
Okay.
He adopted the title Padishah al-Islam, basically Emperor of Islam.
Yeah.
But he also legitimized making war against other Muslim rulers.
Doesn't sound very unified.
Not at all. And then you have figures like Tamerlane, who really emphasized Yasa, his own secular state law, distinct from Sharia, the religious law. This let him build a huge empire, ruling over incredibly diverse subjects. Again, political structure didn't neatly map onto religious identity.
And the identities themselves were quite fluid back then, weren't they? The sources talk about porous group borders.
Very porous. You had Muslim corsairs working with Christian pirates.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And Muslim rulers giving really important jobs in government and trade to Jews, Greeks, Hindus, Armenians. This mixing means you just can't find the roots of the modern Islam versus the West idea back in medieval Muslim-Christian relations. The lines were much, much blurrier.
So even into the 18th century, as European empires were expanding into Eurasia, Muslim rulers weren't thinking in terms of some collective Western threat to a shared Muslim world.
No, not really. They were still mostly pursuing their own independent interests, like any other power. A good example. The Ottoman Empire didn't really care when Russia expanded into Muslim-majority areas in Persia.
They were just indifferent.
Pretty much. Appeals for Muslim solidarity against Russia. They were, as the sources say, inconsequential. There wasn't a Muslim world to rally.
Okay, so that sets the stage. A world without a unified Muslim world. Now, let's jump to the 19th century, because this is where things really start to shift, where this new world starts taking shape.
Right, the crucial period.
The first half of the 19th century still kind of held on to an older imperial ideal, right? Different groups coexisting, strategic alliances mattering more than religion or ethnicity.
Yes, that imperial universalism was still strong, but it was increasingly challenged, especially between the 1820s and 1880s.
How so?
By the growing racialization of Muslimness.
Yeah.
This happened alongside the racialization of Blackness and Asianness, too. It was part of a bigger global shift in how people were categorized.
And this dynamic played out in some really interesting ways, even among the elites, like the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869.
Oh, yeah, that was quite the event.
Egypt's Khedive Ismail hosted more European royals than Muslim leaders, and he commissioned Verdi's opera Aida for it. That feels very cosmopolitan, not narrowly religious.
Absolutely, a grand international gesture.
And that cosmopolitan spirit continued. You had the Indian Muslim reformer, Syed Ahmad Khan, visiting London in 1869. And he introduced the fez to his students back in India, partly out of respect for the Ottoman Sultan, but also because he believed Queen Victoria could rule a diverse empire of Muslims, Hindus, Christians, just like the Ottomans had. He saw empire itself as the unifier.
That's a fascinating perspective. And similarly, when an Ottoman scholar, Abdurrahman Effendi, visited Brazil in 1866.
Brazil, okay.
Yeah. He described the world as being ordered by empires ruling vast areas containing diverse subjects, not primarily by faith or language. So before the late 19th century, that imperial identity often trumped other categories in international affairs.
So how did the European idea of civilization fit into all this? Because Ottoman elites started using that term too, right? Medeniyet.
They did. Starting around the 1830s, they bought into the idea of a single world civilization marked by progress, better governance, and prosperity.
Was this strategic?
Very much so. Ottoman bureaucrats started using this lens. One official, Munif Pasha, even blamed China's losses in the Opium Wars on its low level of civilization. That's a very European way of framing global power dynamics at the time.
And Namık Kemal, the Ottoman journalist.
Right, he argued that resisting this civilization would mean losing freedom. But importantly, Kemal wasn't saying, just copy Europe blindly. No, he stressed maintaining their own distinct identity while empowering the Ottoman Empire, creating a form of civilization that would evoke the world's admiration, something uniquely Ottoman, but still civilized by global standards.
But this shift wasn't just internal to Muslim empires. European views were changing too, dramatically. The Greek War of Independence in 1821 seems like a key moment.
Huge catalyst. Initially, it was just a regional revolt. But European elites, figures like Lord Byron, they rallied massive support, framing it as this epic clash between Christians and Muslims.
That narrative definitely shifted European public opinion against the Ottomans, didn't it? Even if the wider imperial system was, as you said, still largely intact.
It did. And it shows how external views start to really shape how the Ottomans were seen and maybe how they saw themselves.
Then you have this glaring contradiction. The French invade Algeria in 1830, just as Europeans are championing Christian self-determination in Greece.
Blatant hypocrisy. And Algerian intellectuals like Hamdan Koja, they called it out. They appealed to universal values, enlightenment, liberty, asking France, basically, why can't you support a self-governing Algeria that could be your friend?
A powerful challenge.
Absolutely.
Okay, what about the Crimean War? Mid-1850s. How did the Ottomans see that?
They viewed it very much in the imperial mold. For them, it was civilization, meaning the Ottomans and their British and French allies, defending itself against Russian barbarism.
So Russia was the uncivilized one in that narrative.
Exactly. And the Congress of Paris afterwards formally included the Ottoman Empire in the concert of Europe. It signaled, on paper at least, its sovereignty and equality within that imperial system, the old framework trying to adapt.
But then, by the 1870s, things shift again. The Muslim side starts to emerge as a really distinct idea. What happened?
A key factor was British policy changing. They moved from alliance with the Ottomans to neutrality. And this was partly fueled by really influential evangelical Christian propaganda in Britain, hammering home stories of Christian oppression under the Sultan.
Ah, the domestic pressure.
Right. And this led to a crucial realization for the Ottomans. They started seeing Britain's own Muslim subjects in India as being, on their side, the Muslim side.
A potential new source of leverage or identity.
Exactly. As the empire lost more territory to European powers, the Sultan began to really play up his religious authority, his role as caliph. Suddenly, Islam became a source of national identity, a way to rally people.
And this was happening just as European thinkers were becoming more racialized in their views.
Precisely. You get figures like Ernest Renan in 1883, famously declaring Muslims a Semitic race incapable of producing progress in science. It's that stark racialization solidifying the U.S. versus them divide.
Okay, so this leads us right into pan-Islamism taking root, roughly 1878 to 1908. And there's a real paradox here, isn't there?
There is. Just as colonial rulers were solidifying their view of Muslim subjects as this single civilization and race.
Those same Muslim subjects started to embrace this racial identity for various political purposes of their own.
Exactly. It's a fascinating dynamic.
And the caliphate gets reimagined in this period.
Massively. Sultan Abdulrahman II, the Ottoman ruler leader of the most powerful Muslim empire, controller of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, he really leaned into his position as caliph, as the leader of a global Muslim community.
So the meaning shifted.
Yes. This refashioned idea of the caliphate as a single political entity representing all Muslims everywhere, that idea became globally synchronized, really widely understood and discussed, from the 1880s right up to the 1920s.
But was this about breaking away from colonial rule? Was it revolutionary?
Not necessarily, or at least not primarily. For the Ottoman elite, using these religious ties to Muslims living under European rule was more of a bargaining chip, a way to try and restore old alliances, especially with Britain.
How so?
They saw this idea of spiritual sovereignty over Muslims everywhere as a potential basis for a peaceful and stable imperial world order, with the Ottomans having a key role.
And for the Muslim subjects in places like India?
They used this connection to argue for more rights, to criticize racism within the European empires. But it wasn't always about secession. It was often about improving their position within the empire, a strategic use of identity.
And ironically, the European empires actually helped build the networks for this pan-Islamic idea to spread.
Inadvertently, yes. especially the British Empire, by building steamships, telegraph lines, railways across Asia and Africa.
They created the infrastructure.
Exactly. It led to unprecedented connectivity between Muslim communities. And you saw a booming Muslim press, newspapers, journals, spreading these ideas far and wide.
So, faced with this growing racism and claims of European superiority, how did Muslims push back intellectually?
They developed two main arguments: the idea of an Islamic civilization and Islam as a world religion.
Okay, tell me about Islamic civilization first.
Well, Muslim modernists reacted directly to claims like Renan's about Islam and science being incompatible. They reinterpreted Muslim history, focusing heavily on the scientific and philosophical achievements of the late Abbasid period, the Golden Age.
Arguing that Europe owed a debt.
Precisely. Arguing that modern European civilization couldn't have emerged without those foundational Muslim contributions. Figures like Syed Amir Ali presented the Prophet Muhammad himself as a civilization initiator, the founder of a grand progressive tradition.
And the second argument, Islam as a world religion.
This was about elevating Islam's status. They wanted to position it as a universal position comparable to those of Christianity and the Enlightenment.
Why was that important?
It was a way to counter the perception of Islam as somehow backward or particularistic. And internally, it was an effort to create a sense of unity, to overcome the immense pluralism of actual Muslim practices on the ground. They defined Islam as the most internally consistent, rational, systematic religion on earth, an active process of definition and unification.
This period also saw a strong narrative of decline emerge.
Yes, very much so. Pan-Islamic writers started interpreting recent history, the loss of territory, colonization, as a product of Western humiliation. And they argued for Islam's future redemption, often looking back to past glories.
Like Muhammad Iqbal. Exactly,
the great Indian Muslim poet. He famously lamented the end of Arab rule in Sicily, for instance, using the past to inspire the future.
And visually, this idea started appearing on maps.
Yes. You began to see maps depicting the Muslim world as a continuous geographic space, stretching all the way from Southeast Asia to North Africa. This visual representation really helped solidify the concept.
Even Christian missionaries contributed.
Ironically, yes. By creating journals like the Muslim World to study and track their missionary efforts, they inadvertently reinforced the idea of a single, coherent entity they were trying to convert.
But this mapping and awareness also had a dark side in Europe.
Absolutely. It fueled what the sources call a fearful discourse of Muslim peril. European racists used the sheer numbers and geographic extent to emphasize the size of the perceived danger to Western hegemony.
Like a threat.
A huge external threat. In some narratives, Jews were portrayed as the internal threat within Europe, while this giant Muslim world was the external menace. Fear was a powerful tool.
Yet, amidst this tension, there were also some surprising alliances and connections forming.
Definitely. Muslims found intellectual allies even within Europe. You had cooperation between groups like the Theosophists and some pan-Islamic organizations.
And Western converts to Islam played a role.
Significant one. Figures like the American writer Alexander Russell Webb or the British activist Abdullah William Quilliam. Their conversions helped legitimize Islam as a universal religion in the eyes of some Westerners.
Quilliam's story is particularly interesting, isn't it? He was a British convert, but also held a title from the Ottoman Sultan.
Yeah, Sheikh-ul-Islam of the British Isles. He was fascinating. He actually advocated for an alliance between the Ottoman Empire and Britain.
A loyal British subject and a pan-Islamist.
Exactly. He co-authored a letter to the London Times in 1890, protesting a play they felt insulted Muslims, showing his British loyalism. But he saw joint governance of British Muslims, spiritual authority from the Caliph, political loyalty to the crown as a moral and pragmatic necessity.
And his mosque in Liverpool.
It was incredibly diverse. Sailors, local orphans, upper-class Muslims. He presented it as a microcosm showcasing Islamic civilization as being equal to that of the West.
But he wasn't afraid to criticize the British Empire.
Not at all. He sharply critiqued British disrespect for Muslim dignity. He pointed out the hypocrisy, British Christians getting outraged about Armenian Christians under Ottoman rule, while ignoring the plight of Irish Catholics or the lynching of black people in the United States.
That really highlights the confusing nature of minority protection back then, as the sources say.
Totally. It wasn't about universal rights. It was highly selective, based on imperial politics.
Okay, let's move into the turbulent 20th century, world wars, the end of the caliphate. That period from 1908 to 1945 must have seen huge changes.
Massive shifts. After 1908, you had The Young Turks come to power in the Ottoman Empire. They took Abdülhamid's more cautious pan-Islamism and radicalized it, adding strong elements of anti-imperialism.
How did they see the Ottoman Empire's place in the world?
They started seeing it as part of the victimized East and Muslim world. They were really inspired by Japan's victory over Russia in 1905.
An Eastern nation defeating a European power.
Exactly. They hoped the Ottoman Empire could become the Japan of the Near East, leading a resurgence.
This feeling must have intensified with the Balkan Wars in 1912-13.
Tragically, yes. The wars involved horrific ethnic cleansing of Muslims. And the perception in the Ottoman Empire was that Europe was largely sympathetic to the massacres.
Waiting them to feel
that a new crusade was underway. This sense of being under attack fueled huge solidarity from Muslims abroad. Massive financial donations poured in. Volunteers joined the Ottoman Red Crescent Society.
And this convinced Germany
that there was a Muslim world worthy of alliance. They saw this outpouring of support as proof.
So when World War I starts, the Ottoman decision to ally with Germany, it had this pan-Islamic dimension.
It did. German and Ottoman officials actively proclaimed Muslim liberation from European rule. They genuinely hoped to spark a wild revolt among Muslims in British, French, and Russian territories. They believed in the awakening of the fanaticism of Islam, as they put it.
But did it work? Did this global Muslim revolt happen?
Largely, no. It was mostly unsuccessful. They really only found military allies where Ottoman and German agents could physically reach with armies and money.
So reality didn't match the rhetoric?
Not really. Even something like the 1915 Singapore Mutiny among Indian soldiers. Our sources suggest it was driven more by racist treatment from British officers than by some Ottoman-inspired jihad. Local grievances mattered more.
How did the Allies, like Britain, respond to this Ottoman jihad call?
They tried to undermine the Ottoman Caliphate's legitimacy. They pushed propaganda, arguing the Ottoman Sultan couldn't be the true caliph because he wasn't from the Qurayshi tribe, the Prophet Muhammad's tribe.
Did that convince many Muslims?
Probably not many. But it highlighted the tricky position Britain was in, trying to maintain the dual loyalties of its millions of Muslim subjects.
How did those subjects react, like Indian and Muslims?
They generally reiterated their loyalty to Britain, but with clear conditions. They demanded respect for their religious rights, protection of the holy sites in Mecca and Medina, and the continuation of Muslim rule over those sites. Loyalty wasn't unconditional.
Then came the end of the war, and the feeling of betrayal must have been intense.
Absolutely. Especially with things like the Balfour Declaration in 1917, promising British support for a Jewish national home in Palestine.
Which contradicted promises made to Arab leaders.
Exactly. It contradicted British promises that Palestine would be part of the future Arab kingdom. It looked like Britain was choosing an imagined Jewish world over those of the equally imagined Muslim world. Indian Muslims, in particular, felt a profound sense of betrayal.
And this led directly to the Caliphate movement.
Yes, this was a major pan-Islamist effort to preserve the Ottoman Caliphate, running from about 1919 to 1924. It was a direct response to that post-war disillusionment.
What did they do?
They raised huge funds for the Turkish nationalists fighting for independence after the Ottoman defeat. They sent delegations to the Paris Peace Conference to remind leaders like Woodrow Wilson of his promises about self-determination, specifically for the Turkish portion of the old Ottoman Empire.
What was their message?
They emphasized the past glories of Muslim civilization, the rationality of Islam. But interestingly, it wasn't primarily about secession from British rule. It was about preserving the symbol of the caliphate.
But then the new Turkish Republic itself abolished the caliphate in 1924. Why?
Pure realpolitik. Cold, hard calculation. The new Turkish state, based in Ankara, no longer controlled the holy cities. It only ruled about 8 million people. The actual political utility of the caliphate was dramatically reduced. It didn't serve their national interests anymore.
Wow. So the head disappears. What happened then in the interwar period?
You saw this real fragmentation, a diversification of Muslim politics.
Yeah.
Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan pursued authoritarian modernization, trying to build strong nation states.
Elsewhere.
Muslims in the Soviet Union largely embraced secular socialism, at least officially. The Saudis and Yemenis tried building Salafist monarchies based on a strict interpretation of Islam.
So no single path.
None at all. The head of the Muslim world had disappeared. But as the sources say, the body, the global Muslim network, remained. Fragmented, but still connected.
Were there attempts to bring back the caliphate?
Yes, but they were fruitless. Too many competing political interests. Even King Ibn Saud, after his forces captured Mecca in 1925, he wasn't interested in the title of caliph.
Why not?
He saw it as a symbol of his old enemies, the Ottomans. Plus, his strict Wahhabi ideology led to restrictions on practices in Mecca that actually traumatized many South Asian and African Muslims who had funded diverse Sufi shrines and orders there for centuries.
That's ironic. Okay, what about Japan during this time? You mentioned them earlier.
Right, Japan had a unique approach in the interwar years. They developed a strategic Islam policy.
Based on what idea?
They believed that both Muslims and Japanese were Eastern civilizations and colored races. So Japan positioned itself as a potential leader for anti-Bolshevik and anti-Western Muslims. They even sponsored Japanese Muslims to go on pilgrimage to Mecca.
Trying to build influence.
Definitely. But their grand plans to cultivate this unified Muslim world under their leadership, they failed.
Why?
Because, as the sources bluntly put it, it didn't exist. Not as a single bloc ready to follow Japan. A perfect example, Indian Muslim merchants living in Japan whose business depended on good relations between Britain and Japan. As soon as war broke out between them, the merchants just left Japan. Practical interests won out again.
Okay, let's fast forward then. Post-World War II in 1945 up to around 1988. Does the Muslim world idea fade away or does it come back?
Oh, it comes back dramatically. And a key figure here is King Faisal of Saudi Arabia.
Faisal, okay.
After a terrible incident in 1969, a Christian Zionist extremist set fire to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Faisal seized the moment. He called the first ever summit of independent Muslim-majority countries in Rabat, Morocco.
And that led to?
The formation of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the OIC, still around today as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
So Faisal really revived that idea of collective action.
He did. He skillfully used his position as the custodian of Mecca and Medina to style himself as a wise king for all Muslims. He pushed hard for a Muslim bloc at the UN General Assembly, a unified voice on the world stage.
And this was happening during the Cold War, right? How did that influence things?
Hugely. Faisal's pan-Islamism was definitely shaped by the Cold War context. He set up this Muslim network with Saudi Arabia at the center, partly as a conservative counterweight to Nasser's pan-Arab socialism and broader Third World movements, which were often Soviet-leaning.
So it's geopolitical as much as religious?
Absolutely. And Faisal backed it up. He invested heavily in economic development projects across Muslim countries, funded media outlets, supported women's education initiatives, and even abolished slavery in Saudi Arabia itself, all moves designed to boost Saudi Arabia's prestige and leadership credentials.
What about the Palestinian issue? Where did that fit?
It became absolutely central. The loss of Jerusalem to Israel in the 1967 war was a massive shock. It really shattered confidence in secular Arab nationalism.
Opening the door for a more religious framing.
Exactly. The Palestinian cause became essential to pan-Islamic thought. And Faisal used his growing pan-Islamic prestige, plus his good relationship with the U.S., to position himself as a key negotiator on Palestine. He tried to persuade the U.S. to rein in its client, Israel.
It's interesting, though, because around the same time in the 1960s, weren't academics questioning this whole idea?
They were. There was a notable conference at Duke University where scholars just couldn't agree on Islam's role in global politics. Many argued it was actually of quite limited significance. Some really challenged the sweeping essentialist generalizations, pointing out that Muslim identities were complex, multifaceted.
But those academic debates didn't really change the public narrative.
Not entirely. The big ideas of Islamic civilization and Islam as a world religion, they persisted. But they got detached from their original context, that anti-racist struggle within empires.
And they were recycled for new purposes.
Right. Often presented as solutions to the problems of global capitalist modernity, a kind of alternative path.
Was there a particular thinker influencing this?
Yes. The British historian Arnold Toynbee was surprisingly influential among many Muslim intellectuals between the 50s and 70s.
Toynbee, how come?
Well, Toynbee himself had lost faith in Western civilization after World War II. He'd been an imperialist, but came to believe the West was broken. He argued other civilizations should preserve their own unique traditions rather than just copy the West.
And Muslim thinkers picked up on that?
They did.
Yeah.
Writers like Muhammad Asad and Maududi used Toynbee's critique of Western materialism to bolster their own arguments for a distinct Islamic civilization. Some thought it could be synthesized with modernity. Others argued for a return to heritage. Toynbee gave their ideas a certain Western intellectual validation.
Then we get to the late 70s, early 80s, a period where racialized geopolitics seems to make a strong comeback.
A huge turning point. The Camp David Accords in 1978, where Egypt made a separate peace with Israel. that caused widespread disillusionment across the Arab and Muslim world. Many felt betrayed by a secular Arab leader.
And then 1979?
The Iranian Revolution. Ayatollah Khomeini completely, radically reshaped tropes of pan-Islamism. He didn't just talk about it. He asserted his own leadership of the Muslim world.
Which inspired many.
It inspired a renewed sense of Muslim internationalism, definitely. But it also led to deep divisions, especially heightening sectarianism with Saudi Arabia. You ended up with these powerful but divergent visions of the Muslim world competing fiercely.
And the Rushdie affair in 1988 really highlighted this new dynamic.
It's a stark example.
Yeah.
Think back to that 1890s play about Muhammad being canceled in London. That was about British imperial strategy managing their subjects.
Right.
But 1988, you have Khomeini issuing a fatwa, a religious death sentence against Salman Rushdie for his novel The Satanic Verses. This led to book burnings in England, global protests, immense controversy.
And it fueled Islamophobia in Europe.
Massively. It added a new theme to European Islamophobia, that their racialized Muslim neighbors and citizens did not agree with liberal Western values such as freedom of speech. Khomeini's call was different from earlier pan-Islamism. It reached directly into subaltern Muslims and Muslim public opinion globally, bypassing states thanks to modern media.
It's striking that this happened after Edward Said's famous critique of Orientalism came out in 1978.
Exactly. Just as Said was deconstructing these Western stereotypes, events like the Iranian Revolution seemed to pull things back in the other direction. The discourse of the Muslim world in the 1980s looked much like that in the 1910s in some ways.
A period of competing and conflicting pan-Islamisms.
Which unfortunately also helped to revive anti-Muslim racist politics in Europe and the United States, a really complex and often tragic feedback loop.
So wrapping this all up, what's the core takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the clearest insight is that this idea of a single, unified Muslim world, it's a historical construct. It's contingent. It's not some timeless, unchanging reality.
It emerged from specific historical moments, political strategies.
Exactly. Geopolitical encounters, intellectual labor, used strategically by both Muslims and non-Muslims for very different reasons over time.
And understanding that helps us see beyond the illusion. Because this multi-layered discourse, as the sources call it, it has often drowned out other voices, hasn't it?
It really has. It's often suffocated the diverse voices and political demands of actual Muslims in different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
It paints this simplified, sometimes monolithic picture that just doesn't match the messy, complex reality of over 1 billion individuals.
Which leaves us with a crucial question to think about.
Right. If this idea of a singular Muslim world is actually a relatively modern invention, maybe only 150 years old in its current form,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean for how you understand contemporary global events, how you understand the incredibly diverse identities of Muslims today?
And maybe how recognizing this history, this contingency, could help us all move beyond those simplistic and ahistorical frameworks towards, hopefully, more accurate and more just ways of seeing the world.
It's definitely something worth pondering. How much are we still operating under the shadow of this 19th century invention?
A lot to think about. It really reframes a concept that feels so solid, so embedded in how we talk about the world today.